Yeah, so you've got to just advance. I assume the arrow?
Right and left arrow.
So thank you everyone for coming. My name is Jill Jennings Golick and I am one of the deputy directors for Denver's Community Planning and Development Department. We within CPD have been doing permitting presentations for a couple years now, usually focused on the commercial sector and the residential sector. Can you guys hear okay? Are the microphones working? Okay. And even though we've been working with you all within the marijuana industry for a number of years now, we still get a number of questions over time that come up about what do I need permits for, what do I need a modification of premise for, how does that impact my zoning permit, what Denver Fire operational permit do I need, and so we thought we would come together and bring all of the agencies that are most closely involved in the permitting process together to put together a presentation for you all, and then I think what will be most valuable is that we will have time at the end for Q&A to answer your questions. Hopefully we can be just a little bit broader. If you've got a very project-specific question, come up to us afterwards and we can exchange information to answer that specific question about a specific project. So with that, we will do introductions as we go, but you're going to hear from all of the agencies you see on the slide here tonight. And again, just want to say thank you very much for coming out on a Wednesday night.
Thanks, Jill. Okay, let's see. Does this thing, I might have to adjust. Okay, how about that? Okay, so hello, my name is Cynthia Ingram. I am with Excise and Licenses. And to kick this off, I think we want to cover, what are Denver's primary goals in regards to legal marijuana? So as everybody knows, in 2012, Colorado voters passed Amendment 64, which allowed for a system of commercial recreational marijuana. And Amendment 64 came with an option for local jurisdictions to opt in or opt out, at which time Denver decided to opt in. And our goals have been to implement the will of the voters by ensuring that we have careful regulations in place around how marijuana is grown, processed, and sold to make sure that we're upholding health, safety, and welfare standards in the city. So you're going to see a lot of this presentation revolves around those health, safety, and welfare concerns. So in the world of licensing, there are two process tracks that every application goes through. The first license process track is covered when whatever you're doing cannot possibly, or at least hopefully, impact health, safety, or welfare at your facility. So that's going to be your renewals, your corporate structure changes, and your request to amend floor plan applications. The process is pretty simple. You submit an application to Denver Excise and Licenses. We get state approval for whatever it is you're doing, whether that's removing owners or changing your trade name, whatever it is, and then we issue you a license, or we complete your amendment, whatever that might be. The second process track is a little bit more involved. So this is when whatever you're doing could potentially impact health, safety, or welfare standards at the facility. So this is going to be your applications for a new license, a transfer of location, a transfer of ownership, or a modification of premise. So essentially, this path starts again with application submittal, and then there's a quality control review. After which, if you're a storefront, you're going to have a hearing potentially if you're either a new license or you're moving locations. And then we get to the real meat and potatoes of the process, which is the inspections piece. So that's where 5 or 6 different city agencies will come out and they will visit you at your facility and make sure those health, safety, and welfare standards are being enforced. Again, at the end of that, we ask for state approval of whatever it is you're applying to do. So state approval for your mod, state approval for your transfer, and then at the end you get a license or we close out your application. So before we move on, we get a lot of questions these days about what is the difference between a modification of premise and a request to amend floor plan. So we have some content here for that. A modification of premise per MUD rule is required anytime you do any change to your facility which is considered material or substantial. And rules M and R 303 grant pretty wide berth for the local jurisdiction to determine what is material and substantial. So Denver has opted to interpret that to mean anything you do that has the possibility of impacting health, safety, or welfare at your facility is going to be material and substantial and require a mod. A list of what that entails is altering your facility layout or square footage. So this means you added a wall, you removed a wall, you added a door, you removed a door. You changed a room use from an office to a grow room. Anything that changes the configuration of your building. Also, point of sale location changes, changing your electrical fixtures that you're using for cultivation, changing your extraction equipment or any component thereof, so your ventilation hood, for example. Changing your enrichment system, or basically doing anything that would require a building permit, with the exception of adding security cameras. That does not require a modification of premise. Otherwise, if you're doing something to your building, it is a modification of premise in Denver. The other track, the request amend floor plan track, is when whatever you're doing is not material and substantial. So that's adding and removing security cameras, identifying your licensed premise, limited access area, or restricted access area for the first time. Subsequent changes to those areas do require a mod. And then finally, the last one's a little confusing. This is altering an ongoing application for a modification of premise, a transfer of location, or a new license. So for example, if you submit a modification of premise to change an office to a cultivation room, and then the fire department comes out and says you need a second mode of egress that you didn't originally have planned for. Well, now the floor plan you had originally given to excise and license no longer works because you've added a new doorway. So you would have to amend your floor plan via this secondary process. A couple of notes before we leave this slide. One, you only need a new zoning stamp if you are altering the facility layout, which includes doing any type of exterior work, rooftop units, landscaping, things like that, or if you are changing interior uses or walls or doorways, if the actual building configuration is changing. If you are not doing any of those things and you are, say, adding and removing cameras or changing out your extraction equipment, you still need to give us a floor plan with a stamp of approval from zoning. But you can give us a second floor plan that is identical in configuration with your cameras marked or your licensed premise marked on it or your point of sale. You don't need to go back to zoning anytime you're doing something that's not altering your facility layout. The other thing I want to touch on, because we get a lot of questions, is when we determine whether or not a modification of premise is required, we are basing that decision off of the last floor plan approved by excise and licenses. So it happens frequently that maybe you bought a license and the previous owner modified a piece of it and you didn't even know. Or maybe you pulled a building permit or you went to the MED but you never came to excise and licenses. So in that case, we are going to require a retroactive modification of premise to allow for all of the inspection agencies to come out and verify that whatever change you made to that facility is going to meet those health, safety, and welfare standards. Okay, so when you get to inspections, there are 6 agencies that do inspections: zoning, fire, building, public health, environmental quality, and excise and licenses. Typically, those agencies are going to require that you either have a permit or you have a plan review submission into us before they come out and inspect, and certainly before you do any work on your facility. Another FAQ we get is, in what order do you need to do your licensing applications and your building permit applications? And the answer is that's really up to you. There are pros and cons on either end of that. For example, if you're a storefront and you have a needs and desires hearing, you might not want to get building permits until after you've passed your needs and desires hearing, because if it doesn't turn out the way you want, that could be a sunk cost. On the other hand, as hopefully we all know, your licensing applications, you get 12 months to complete them. So you might want to get a jump start on your building permits so that you can get through the whole process in the allotted amount of time. So which option you choose, it's completely up to you as a business. So excise and license does not do a plan review, but we do quality control applications once we receive them. And what that entails is, first we do a proximity measurement, which you can see our handy dandy software. We type in your address, we look within 1,000 feet and see if there's anything there. Once we do that, we also review your documents to make sure A, you submitted all of them, B, they're complete, C, they're legible, and D, they're legally executed. So if you turn in a lease and it doesn't have signatures, or you turn in a copy of a driver's license and we can't see who you are, those would be reasons that we would reject a quality control review. But then once you pass quality control, we move you forward to either a hearing or inspections. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Anna to start talking about zoning inspections.
Okay. Thanks, Natia. I'm Anna Valdez with the Denver Zoning Department, and I'm going to be talking about, the three types of review that we do in zoning. Commercial zoning is really what we're going to focus on today. The SDP is a separate process that we're not going to deal with, and Jill is going to speak about simultaneous reviews when she has her turn. So, really the first step, in no matter what process you decide to go through, is getting a copy of your existing zoning file. So that includes all your existing permits, floor plans, site plans. Then you know what you're dealing with, you know what we need to account for on your next permit. Maybe you did something without a permit, you got a building permit, but you didn't get a zoning permit. So this is our opportunity to make sure that everything is correct. We also have a new process that we're doing to accommodate the licensing requirements for the floor plan modifications, and that involves getting all of your previously approved plans, reconciling them with the zoning that we have on file, and issuing you a new up-to-date floor plan for excise and license. So when you do decide that you need a new permit, whether that's for construction or use change, we have new zoning applications. We just redid all of our applications, and they're very easy to use, and they have a lot of information about all of our use categories and what our submittal requirements are currently. This is an example of a good floor plan. This is our floor plan sample, and you see that all of the rooms are dimensioned and labeled. That's one of our top flaws in our submittals, is that we don't have all of the rooms labeled and dimensioned. That means hallways, entryways, everything. This is an example of a good site plan where we call out what our uses are, our square footage, and our parking. This is another good example of a site plan. You see all of the parking dimensions are called out, the zone lot line is called out, and the HVAC is called out, whether it's existing or new, and it's easy to see where everything is. This is what the inspector is going to be looking for when he goes out. He's inspecting against these plans. This is a list of all of our land use categories and their corresponding licenses. And it's important to know what your use is, so you will want to do some research and read those definitions to see what best applies to you. You also need sign permits. So that's going to be anytime you do anything. Maybe you put a mural, but the mural has to do with your use. That means that's a sign. If you paint it on your building, it's a sign. If you put it in the window, it's a sign. So these are some examples of illegal signs and legal signs. We have very good sign submittal requirements and explanations online in our sign guide, and that's going to tell you all the sign definitions, how we measure, and how we calculate your allowance. Your allowance is calculated based on your street frontage, and it depends whether or not you have other tenants on site. So it's really important for you to give us good, up-to-date site plans. It's to your benefit to give us the best information so that we can give you the best allowance, the best calculation. So typically what we see is missing dimensions of all types. If you're in doubt, put the dimension on there. There's very few times when I don't want to know where something is in relation to the zone lot line, so err on the side of caution. Also use your land use terminology whenever possible. I don't have a problem if it says grow instead of husbandry, but when we get into words like kitchen, that could be construed to mean different things. So it's real important that we get the right zoning designation and we use the right terminology. And your plans and your submittal, your plans and your application need to agree with each other. So if you call something kitchen on your plan, but you call it a laboratory on your application, then we have a problem because we're not in agreement. The other thing we have an issue with is that people don't realize that their zoning permits do expire after 180 days. So keep that in mind. You can ask for an extension, but you need to do it in writing, and the code spells out what that request needs to include. It's important that you do that at least 30 days before you anticipate an expiration. That's very important. That all can, again, be found in the code. That means if you are going to get a building permit, don't wait too long to submit for building. Try to have an idea of how long it's going to take you to get through building before you pull the zoning permit. Okay, the other issue we have is transformers, and everybody knows that those have been sometimes placed in places that are inappropriate. They don't meet the zoning code, and so that causes a lot of problems. So just be advised that they are required to meet zoning setbacks, and that there are some allowances to be in the setback, but you have to meet those limitations. We also offer pre-application meetings. Right now we're scheduling into April, but we do allow you to come in and kind of work through what your idea is to make sure that you're on the right track, and to let you know whether or not there's something like a showstopper that you need to be advised of. And we'd like you to submit well in advance of any meetings that you have with the Med, because our review process is currently at about 6 weeks, so you want to be able to get through before you have any meetings with any other regulatory agencies. And we also have this new inspection checklist that's available to you. So that means you're going to know what the inspector's looking for when he comes to do your inspection. And you can also do 311 for licensing inspections as well as COs, but you have to request that at the same time. Okay, from there I'm going to turn it over to Jill.
Thank you, Anna. Again, I'm Jill Jennings-Golick, Deputy Director for Community Planning and Development. So I'm going to talk a little bit about when do you need building permits and what codes apply to your facility. So pretty much if you are changing occupancy, so let's say it was previously an office and now you're going to retail sales and you're going to be setting up a marijuana store, that would require a new certificate of occupancy. And even something in the same occupancy category from a building perspective, let's say an office and a hair salon, those are both a Group B occupancy, but they're very different character in terms of uses, so that would also require a change in occupancy. So that's a process that involves in submitting for building permits and then going through inspections. If you're adding square footage, obviously you'll need building permits as well as zoning permits. And then any interior work that you might be doing, such as new walls, moving doors, if anything related to your mechanical, plumbing, or electrical systems and equipment, security, hardware, and access control. But one caveat, if you already have a security system in place and all you're doing is adding, let's say, one additional security camera, you don't necessarily need a building permit, but you may need a licensed electrician to pull a quick permit if you need to put in a new circuit to serve that security camera. And then changes in finishes such as flooring and countertops do not require building permits. So our building codes currently, we are on the 2015 series of international codes with 2016 set of Denver amendments, and you can find all of our amendments as well as links to the international codes at our website shown here. Also want to note that we follow the state in terms of the electrical code. So just last July, the state changed from the 2014 National Electric Code to the 2017. And so any new permit requests that come in have to follow that electrical code. But if you're doing work under permits previously issued under the 2014 National Electric Code, you can continue with that work. So, gosh, a year or so ago now, we worked after some questions had come up related to occupancy classification for marijuana stores to put together a policy, and it's in our Denver Building Code Policy IBC 302.1 to classify when marijuana stores have to go through a change of occupancy process. So when this all started back in '09, we had made a decision because it was just envisioned to be medical at that time, and there was this whole consultation process that was envisioned to be involved in part of the medical marijuana world, that we were going to treat medical stores more like a Group B occupancy, so a doctor's office type thing. What it has transitioned into, and especially with the advent of recreational marijuana, is it's a store. It's like any other store if you're selling jeans or you're selling marijuana. And for us, from a building code perspective, that's a Group M occupancy. So in working with a marijuana industry group and after touring a number of stores, we put together some thresholds. So this doesn't apply if you're just out doing your business, you've had your Group B occupancy for your store, but if you're gonna make changes, then we're gonna ask that you go through this change of occupancy process. So if you're increasing your square footage, we'll wanna see a change in CO. If you're altering more than 50% of your total space of that store or center, so you're doing a pretty major renovation, then we'll wanna go through that change of occupancy process. Or if you're a shared location, so you've got a store, let's say, and a grow facility, if you're modifying 50% of your space, but most of that's in the grow facility, we'll still want to go through that change of occupancy, because you're already going through all the work to get drawings prepared and do the appropriate code analysis, so it's really not that much additional work to do this at that time. And again, you can read more details about that in our building code policy, which is online at denvergov.org/building-code. So real quick, in December of 2016, the City Council passed an amendment to our building code requiring all single occupant, so that means you've got a room with a door and one toilet and one sink, or family or assisted use restrooms to be signed as gender neutral. So this went into effect in December of 16 for new facilities, but if you're an existing facility and you have a single occupant stall, that sign needs to be changed by April 30th of this year. So you've got a month and a half, give or take, to get that done. The code does not specify what type of sign, so we've got some images here. Really all that we're looking for is that it has to be clear that it's open for use by all genders. And then, again, if you've got a family restroom, which most probably don't, family restrooms are usually found in assembly occupancy, so Pepsi Center, Coors Field. But if you do have a family restroom, we want that family restroom sign to remain, and then you would add a second sign indicating that it's also able to be used by anyone of any gender. So I'm going to talk real quickly about sort of our login process, and brand new as of, was it this week, I think? We're accepting plans electronically, which is huge for us. It's been a long time coming, but it's so easy your kid can do it. And it may be better if your kid does it, depending on how good you are with technology. So you can send your plans to planreview@denvergov.org. So no longer do you have to come to our second floor counter, make an appointment, or wait in line to log in. You can send in your plans by email, and we will log them in for you. So you're going to save all your files as a PDF. And then any documents, and this is kind of the same with paper, that is prepared by a licensed architect, engineer, or surveyor, has to have a stamp. So in the paper world, you've got an original signature, an original stamp, and then the same goes in the electronic world. And we have guidance on our website about how to create an electronic signature that meets our needs, but each of those individual disciplines will have to sign and stamp their work electronically. And then again, if it's not for you, you can still submit paper to us, and you can make an appointment for our login service at denvergov.org/ds. And that's also where you'll find additional instructions. And then just a quick note, this isn't for any walkthrough process. Our walkthrough process is still an in-person review at our counter. So as Anna mentioned, last year we launched a simultaneous zoning and building process. So the goal of this was to cut down overall review time so that you weren't, waiting for zoning to do their work and then waiting for building to do that work. This allows you to have things happen concurrently. So zoning's looking at your plans and building's looking at your plans at the same time. And then once everything is approved, you would get your zoning and building permits. To do this, you're going to have to include a zoning submittal when you log in for your building permits. And then there's also a simultaneous review request form in our commercial building permit guide that's going to have to be signed by the registered design professional working on your project, essentially attesting that they have actually looked at the code, that what they're doing and what's proposed on the plans is in compliance with the zoning code. If you log in and we find out, for instance, that the use you're proposing isn't permitted, we're going to stop the project and building review won't happen until the zoning issues are resolved. So you really want to make sure you're checking the zoning code and that the use is allowed and that it's not, for instance, require some sort of administrative review on the zoning side, like a special exception review that requires Board of Adjustment or an informational notice process. And then this is not an ideal path for zoning permits that can be issued at the counter. We also did release guidance earlier this year on our website about what kind of projects zoning will review at the counter and what projects they recommend logging in. So it's no longer a surprise. We're being upfront and telling you, so you don't have to spend time coming to the counter if it's something that we're going to tell you has to get logged in for a review by zoning. So this list covers some of the major items that are often missed at the time of login for building permits. So this is not an exhaustive list. Our commercial building permit guide has checklists depending on project type, whether you're a new building or tenant finish in an existing building, about what's needed. But often what is missing and what you get turned away for are the fact that you don't have structural calculations, or you don't have a complete set of mechanical, electrical, or plumbing. Your code analysis is missing, or you're referencing the wrong set of building codes. Like, for instance, the 2018 version of codes just came out and your plans say 2018, but we in the city are working under the 2015 series of codes. So that's a big issue. And then your code analysis has to indicate your method of International Energy Conservation Code compliance. That's going to get you turned away at the counter if you don't at least have that minimal piece of information for energy code documentation. As previously talked about, your plans have to be signed and stamped when prepared by a registered design professional. And then you've either got to have your zoning permit already, you've got to have your okay from your project coordinator if you're doing a new building and you're in the site development plan process, or you have to have that request form for a simultaneous building and zoning review along with your whole zoning set to submit. And then have to submit bound plans or PDFs if you submit electronically. So a few quick tips. This is true on both the building side and the zoning side. Until you pay your plan review fees, or on the zoning side, your permit fee, we don't look at your plans. So if you get that invoice, make sure you pay it right away, whether you pay that online or you pay it at our second floor cashier. Then it gets in the queue to be assigned to a reviewer. You would be surprised at how many things we have sitting around for a month or longer, and then we get a call saying, hey, why has no one looked at my plans? And we say, you haven't paid your fees. So please make sure you don't leave the second floor without paying your plan review fees. And then another helpful tip, especially for commercial projects, make sure you are submitting for your sewer use and drainage permit at the same time as you submit for building permits. They have their own review process, it can take time, and the last thing we want is to have building approved and you're still waiting on your sewer use and drainage permit. So please make sure you're submitting for both of those at the same time. So we have some folks here on the building side that are far more able to speak to this, but this is just a quick highlight of some of the issues that come up in our building reviews. On electrical, a big one I know in plan review is that your plans aren't coordinated across disciplines, so there's something showing on the electrical pages and then something totally different on the mechanical pages. So that coordination is key. Mechanical and plumbing side, a good one, and we'll talk about odor control, but if what you're doing for odor control causes any sort of changes to your building's mechanical equipment, then you may need to submit for plan review and permits to modify your HVAC equipment. And then our architectural structural folks are usually looking at accessibility, egress, and then ensuring that there's fire-rated corridors in non-sprinklered buildings. So another item that gets people hung up quite a bit in our process is what's the difference between a resubmittal and a modified drawing. So if you don't have your permits yet and all you're doing is responding to one of our reviewers' comments, then you're making a resubmittal. If you already have your permits and you've got to make a change in the field because of some issue or another, you're going to submit to us a modified drawing. So resubmittals come in via our resubmittals counter or by email back to that planreview@denvergov.org email. And then you're going to make sure you include a letter outlining how you're submitting or responding to comments received, so that it's really easy and takes little time for our plan reviewer to go check and make sure all the comments have been addressed. For modified drawings, again, gets a new log number and is assessed mod hour fees. And most important that we get with that is a letter outlining what's changed from the original permits and why. When we get just drawings, it's sometimes very hard to tell what was changed. And so that rationale and description saves a lot of time on our reviewer's part and makes it much easier for us to issue permits. And then once those are approved, you do get new permits. So you could have a job with 2 commercial permits, for instance, if you had to come in and make a modified drawing submittal. And so that does mean you have to call inspections on both of those permits. So one thing that came up as we were preparing for this, when I asked a question about what people want to hear about, I heard a bit that green roofs were very interesting. And so the first thing, my pun for the evening, no, not that kind of green. So just a quick reminder, marijuana in the city of Denver has to be in a fully enclosed structure. So it's not an eligible plant type if you're trying to do a green roof on your building. So if you're looking for information about green roofs, denvergov.org/green roofs has all of the information we have compiled to date, along with the initiative language. This was passed by Denver voters and went into effect January 1st of this year. So if you have a roof if you have a building and it needs a roof replacement and your building is over 25,000 square feet, you have to comply with this ordinance. If you are doing a new building and it's over 25,000 square feet, you have to comply with the ordinance. And then if you are doing an addition that causes your building, let's say your building today is 20,000 square feet and you're doing a 6,000 square foot addition, your building is now over 25,000 square feet. And so the roof on your addition would have to comply with this ordinance requirements. So on our website, we have submittal requirements as well as the initiative required green roof declaration form. At the end of that form contains all of the submittal requirements for the various project types here. So unfortunately, one thing that this did is last July, we launched e-permitting for most of our quick permits, including roofs. But if you're now subject to this requirement, you can't get your roofing permit online anymore, unfortunately. So if you're requesting a variance or if you're requesting an exemption because you feel like your building would need a major structural alteration to comply, you're going to have to log in plans and details for that to our permit counter in order for staff to review. And that green roof declaration form has all of the details about what you need to submit and where to. And then just a quick caveat, this could all change. So as some of you may know, Denver Department of Public Health and Environment has established a task force, stakeholder group that is looking into the initiative and may recommend changes to City Council. After 6 months, City Council can make modifications to that voter-passed initiative with a 2/3 majority vote. Not sure yet. This is what we have at the present time, but I just wanted to make sure you were aware that things may change, but we'll keep information updated on our Green Roofs website. And then one last note, you can schedule building inspections online now. You don't have to call our horrible IVR system anymore. So that is really exciting. And as Anna shared too, same with building, we can do your license and CO sign off at the same time. We just need to know that you need that done. So you have to request both. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Lucas. I'm a fire protection engineer with Denver Fire Department. I'm going to give a quick highlight of our permitting process and inspection process. We have an hour planned for QA after this, so please ask specific questions if you need to regarding topics. I'd be happy to address them. High-level overview of our permitting and inspection process is shown here. The blue line at the bottom, the blue swim lane, is basically the construction permitting process when you're obtaining permits for construction or build-out or modification of a facility. You've heard a reoccurring theme tonight of get your permits. That's what we're looking for fire code compliance. We lean on the building department permitting and inspection process to make sure a building is safe. Once you've submitted plans to the building department, the fire department engineers will review those plans concurrently with building department permitting. So there's no reason to do separate submittals. They're reviewed at the same time. During that process, in addition to construction, also hazardous processes are reviewed and approved at that time. So if you're doing extractions, if you're doing alcohol extractions, alcohol post-processing, those information are going to be questioned to be submitted, and it's the responsibility of your design team, your engineers or architects, to justify that whatever process you're doing is in compliance with the fire code. We're looking for that to be submitted at that time. Also, quantities of hazardous materials stored on site to make sure you're not exceeding maximum allowable quantities should all be submitted at that time. Once they're approved, you get your construction permits are issued, and then there's an inspection process to ensure all of those permits are completely closed out. The middle swim lane in red is our operational permit process. Denver Fire will issue operational permits for different processes to be conducted, such as extractions. We issue an operational permit for flammable storage, depending on the amount of hazardous material that you have stored. Those are annual permits that are biannually inspected. That's how we track and permit those inspections biannually in Denver. The top swim lane is the excise and license sign-off. So whenever excise and license requires fire inspection, whether it be for new facility or a transfer of ownership, what our inspectors will do before they come out and sign out is just make sure that nothing has changed. You're still in compliance with how the space was built out, or you've already completed all of these other operational permit and construction permitting processes. So quickly on marijuana-infused product, a couple issues that we, just to go over. We do have an extraction room guide, what we expect to see. We kind of summarized all of the requirements in a guideline at denvergov.org/DFD marijuana info. The Denver Fire Code has been adopted in 2016. It's Chapter 39, and it could be found at denvergov.org/building code. Chapter 39 is retroactive for extraction facilities, with a compliance date of October 1st of 27, January of, I forget, but we're well past that's why I don't know, because we're well past the compliance date. So all extraction facilities should be in compliance with the Denver Fire Code today. If there's any architects or engineers or facility owners working outside of Denver in a jurisdiction that adopted the 2018 International Fire Code, those requirements are also retroactive for extraction facilities. Extraction rooms, a couple of things that we see during inspections are just space planning and processes. The Denver Fire Code was written in LPG extraction rooms, butane or propane, to protect three operations. The extraction equipment or extraction operation itself, off-gassing spent plant material when it's removed from the extractor, and off-gassing oil when you're collecting your oil. Those are the three primary things we're trying to protect against with the systems in that Denver Fire Code chapter. Space planning is kind of key. We see laboratory hoods being used where the extraction equipment is kind of stuffed into it, and there's not much extra space to off-gas spent plant material. When you dump out your plant material, take a sock full of plant material out, there needs to be space in there to allow that to off-gas. Or if you have a garbage can that's inside of your ventilated enclosure, it needs to be vented at the bottom to allow that gas to come out. LPG is heavier than air. So really pay attention to the size of your equipment, and you have room in there to do those operations. We've also seen operators take their columns or collection chambers outside of the ventilated enclosure to retrieve their oil. The oil retrieval process needs to be conducted inside of that ventilated enclosure. Nothing should leave that ventilated enclosure unless you first use your portable flammable gas detector to make sure that it's not off-gassing anymore. Then it can be moved out to do your rest of your processing. Change of LPG extractors. If you have an approved operation with an operational permit issued for your extraction process, that permit will will record a serial number, make, model of that extraction equipment. If you want to change that, and there's and it's on the approved Denver list of approved extractors. It's basically just a switch of operational permit. So if you do a reapplication and that extractor's on the approved list, we can just update and issue you a revised new operational permit for extractions with that new extraction equipment. You do need to have a certification letter from the engineer to be submitted along with that application. Flammable liquid extractions or post-oil processing. During plan review, again, I talked about the hazardous processes being submitted. Just because you have a lab hood doesn't mean that any operation can be conducted inside of it. So those details need to be submitted and clarified by volumes. Are you heating your flammable liquid? And that'll get approved during that extraction. That extraction or processing will get approved during your permitting process. If you're already an existing MIP and you want to change your solvent or change your process, we want to review that to make sure that your existing facility is still in compliance with the fire code. So that process would occur by, again, a reapplication of your extraction permit with a document from an engineer or an architect reviewing what that process is and that the systems that are there are in compliance with the fire code. This is mainly coming up, we see very often lately that in 2018, an MED approved the use of pentane as an extraction solvent. So if you want to use that solvent or post-oil process using pentane, we want to review that. Pentane is a higher class of flammable liquid than ethanol, so it might not just be a one-for-one swap. Fire inspections. The fire department performs operational inspections or fire safety inspections versus construction inspections. Usually if a permit is issued, a construction permit to install a CO2 enrichment system or a fire suppression system, there's construction inspections that occur based on those permits that are issued. Operational or fire safety inspections occur twice a year in marijuana facilities and are triggered on that operational permit that's been issued. Acceptance testing for new systems or new MIPS, we will come out and do an acceptance test before either finaling a permit or issuing an operational permit. For CO2 enrichment systems, before the fire department will final that permit and close it out, a test will be conducted on the system to make sure all the carbon dioxide sensors are operating correctly and the visual appliances are alarming correctly. That operation will be done prior to signing off that permit. For a new MIP or an extraction facility, we want to make sure that the room's been designed and is functioning as a whole. So that means we want to check airflow in the space, interlocks if they're required between ventilation and lighting. If there's LPG or LP gas detection in the space, we want that to see that operate and tested with calibrated gas to ensure that it's alarming at the correct levels. License transfers of ownership. We do require new updated operational permit, so if there's a change of that, we'll also come out and do a quick inspection to make sure, again, you have your construction permits if needed, or if any construction has changed. And we just ask that you post those operational permits on site, so if there's any inspections occurring, they're available to the fire inspectors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shawnette.
Hi, my name is Shawnette Gillespie. I'm with Department of Public Health and Environment, Public Health Inspections. You might know us previously as Department of Environmental Health. We did have a name change recently. So our department regulates all marijuana kitchens and dispensaries that produce or hold consumable edible products. We regulate these programs under the same regulations as our retail food regulations. And for our purposes, any marijuana product that's consumed orally by your customer is considered a food product and falls under our regulation. So prior to requesting any license sign-off, any new or remodeled marijuana dispensary and infused kitchen, also what we call MIPS, is required to undergo a health plan review. Our review is included with the building department, but it is required to flag our department specifically for a review so we don't get missed. And then after an approved plan review has been completed, That's when we conduct our inspection on site for either a certificate of occupancy, a temporary certificate of occupancy, or your business license. Okay, and then for a transfer of ownership, if there are no changes whatsoever to the facility, a plan review is not required at that time. And then we could jump straight to the inspection process. But this means that all equipment from the previous owner is left on site and there are no major changes to the operational procedure or the product list. So a plan review is required for transfer of ownership if you're adding any new equipment or any new plumbing fixtures, if there are any significant changes to the operating plan or the product list. A good example would be the previous owner maybe doing smoking-only concentrates, and the new owner now producing edible gummies. Or a new owner maybe installing a bottling line for infused beverages. That's a significant change that we would want to do a review. And then a plan review is also required if there are any room designation changes or floor plan revision. And a good example of that would be turning your storage room into your manufacturing room, because we just need to make sure all the proper fixtures and equipment are in place to produce a safe product. And then I also wanted to go over these sign-offs that also require a health inspection. So marijuana labs do require our inspection for the license, but we don't conduct regulatory inspections at these facilities. Marijuana transport facilities do require a plan review if you're going to be holding any potentially hazardous edible. And potentially hazardous, is any product that you have to keep at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or below for a public health risk. And then the transport facilities do require a license sign-off, and if you're holding potentially hazardous edibles, we'll get regulatory inspections as well. And then I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I did want to provide some of the MIP-specific requirements, specifically with the plumbing fixtures, because that's one of the most common questions that we do get. And one of the most important things is having that directly drained hand sink in your extraction room, but also in your preparation areas and your initial packaging rooms. Okay, so after you've done all your plan review, if that's required, and you've received approval from all the other departments, like the building department, you can contact our public health inspections line, you could contact the 311 City Services to set up an inspection, or you could email our PHI comments at denvergov.org. And then you could also request a date and time with the inspector who gives you the call to set up the appointment. And let's see, we also conduct routine regulatory inspections at the facility. Usually it happens about 2 months, 1 to 2 months after we do your license sign-off, and then approximately every 6 months thereafter. And regulatory visits are unannounced, along with any complaint-based inspection. Okay, and I'm also just provided this slide for reference. Once you're ready for your inspection, this is just the main points to have prepared prior to your final sign-off. These items would prevent our approval, but also, let's see, the business license we sign electronically, and then the temporary or certificate of occupancy, we sign that manually, but we can't sign that if these items aren't available. So just wanted to provide that for your reference, and then I'm going to pass it on to Ben with environmental quality.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Siller, also with the Department of Public Health and Environmental Quality Division. So the biggest thing that we require, and it started in November of 2016, are odor control plans for all cultivation and marijuana-infused product facilities. And so what we require on those is you just have to submit a plan. Go to denvergov.org and just type odor into the search bar, and you'll get all the information that you need on how to fill out the plan. There's some templates on there that offer really good, examples, and you can just follow it along. It's been a real mixed bag, and we've received over 800 of these plans since then. And some are really good and they're spot on, and then others are very weak, and we go through this process where they have to submit revisions to that plan. Some of the things about the plan, if it's new or an existing facility and you're putting in new equipment and you can't prove that you've had equipment in since November 2016, you have to get a certification from a certified industrial hygienist or a professional engineer that's attesting that your plan is going to effectively mitigate odors in accordance with our regulation. And then if you do any amendments or you need an approval from us, we need to have a submitted odor control plan before we even sign off on your amendment. The most effective control that we've experienced is activated carbon. One of the things I wanted to warn you about is there's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there that are trying to sell this unproven technology. And if you enter into that, you run the risk that it may not be effective to do odor control. Then other inspections that we do, we come out, we hopefully do annual inspections, they're unannounced. But some of the things that we look at is your waste management. Light bulbs contain mercury, so those have to be stored properly and disposed of properly. We also look at your energy use. We're collecting that data because within our office, we also have a sustainability group that's reaching out to the industry to try and encourage energy use reduction. And then again, the odor control, we'll follow up on that. We'll check your plan and make sure that you're following it. Probably like the activated carbon, the most important thing is to change that out. If you're not doing that, then it may result in a citation. And then the marijuana-infused products is the same thing. We require the odor control for that. Sometimes it's an enclosed system and there isn't any emissions to the ambient air. And if that's the case, you just describe that in your plan, but you still have to submit all the information for the plan. Thank you.
Okay, hold on. Okay. All right, so when you're done with all of them, you come back to excise and license. We are always the last business license inspection, and we check for a number of things, but I'm going to highlight a couple. When we come out, we would like to see appropriate limited access and restricted access signage. We are going to verify appropriate camera coverage and appropriate retention in your surveillance system. We'll make sure that your facility layout matches your floor plan. We will look to make sure that your alarm system is functional, properly permitted, and that if you have security guards, they're also properly licensed. And whatever waste disposal system you're using has to be compliant with MED rules. Your manifest and labeling methods must be in compliance with MED rules, and basically everything in your facility has to be in compliance with MED rules. So these are the highlights. We have a full checklist on our website, but the MED rulebook is our rulebook. We do have something in our code that says anything on their books is in our books. So that is business licensing inspections in a nutshell. Now, once you're done with all your inspections, that's not the end. There's this last piece, and this is missed a lot. So state approval is required no matter what you are doing. There is one exception, and that is the request to amend floor plan application, which I believe every business is going to be submitting this year. You do not need state approval for that, but for everything else, we have to either get a new license or a letter or a permit from the Marijuana Enforcement Division saying that they approve whatever it is you're doing. You do not have to bring that to us. Please don't bring that to us. Please email us your proof of state approval at exlapplications@denvergov.org. Include your BFN or amendment record ID, amendment as in amending an existing license. And we will email you back a license, or we will email you back and tell you that we've closed out your mod or your corporate structure change or whatever it is. You do not need, and this is a kind of a new thing, you don't need a license on a special piece of paper because we have iPads and we can look up and make sure your license is actually valid. So you can just email us, we'll email you back, and then you have a license. So with that, I did want to note, for those of you who are wondering about the cameras, somebody in the industry suggested we tape this, so we did. And anybody who happened to not be here or wants to go back and watch this again, you'll have that opportunity. And with that, we're going to open up to questions. Right.
So real quick, we have a microphone over here to my left, your right. So folks could line up there in an orderly fashion, and we'll take questions one by one. Amazingly, because we were much longer yesterday, we actually have an hour left to hear from you all and to get your questions and feedback. So very excited to talk to you all, and I just wanted to say again, thank you very much for coming.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ashley Kilroy, and I am from the Office of Marijuana Policy and also the Director of Excise and Licenses. And I just first want to say thank you so much. Thanks to Jill for putting this together. I know it was a huge lift for you. Thanks to our presenters. This was great. And I know it's a ton of information. It is a ton of information. But they've got the links to the website. They've got all the information for you to follow up. And we really did this because we got the questions from you. You all were asking, a lot of people who have been in alcohol, working in bars and restaurants and liquor stores and other businesses have a lot of this experience. They kind of know how to do it. But you all, with a brand new industry just starting, really needed to get this high level overview. So again, thank you. Great job.
Thank you. All right, questions?
Hey, how you doing? Didn't expect to be the first question.
There's always got to be a first, so thank you.
So I have a couple questions, one of which being change of occupancy. I have an operation in which I'm not doing any new construction, and I'm not the building owner, so it seems as though the building owner will have to, file for that, which is what's going on right now. I'm just curious about the inspections, being that we're not making any new constructions to the buildings, we're not doing anything different with electrical or plumbing. What will be the process of the change of occupancy, and who would need to be on site from my team? Would I need to be on site, or would just the building owner need to be on site? And my second question is in terms of the process, excise license in the last inspection, if we're not supposed to be using marijuana until we're licensed, how exactly are you guys checking the process? Especially, I'm not doing doing an extraction or anything like that, but in terms of that, how would you guys be checking the process?
So I'm going to have Scott Prisco, our building official, come up to talk about your first question.
First of all, I also want to thank everyone for being here, and I know I'm fairly new to this role as a building official in Denver. It's about 2.5 years now. And I know that this industry was sort of a tough transition, you coming in for inspections. Some folks, because of this industry, weren't familiar with building construction and permitting and all that. So it was sort of a rocky start from what I hear before I got here. And I think part of this process that we're doing with different industries, the restaurant industry and you, we also did it when we created our marijuana policy change. We reached out to a lot of folks in the marijuana industry to do that. So we're trying to be more interactive in what we're doing. And I want you to know that tonight isn't sort of the end of our interaction. So if you have questions, feel free to call our offices. If you want help along the way, that's what this is. This is sort of opening the door, saying, hey, we want to help you through the process. We're here to help you. We want you to know that. This is really important, and we do it with all different industries in Denver. So if you need help, we are here to help you through the process. Don't think we're sort of the bad guys and we're the hurdle you have to get over. Think of us more as your team to get through the process. So I just want to put that out there. Feel free to call me or my office, the folks in our office at any time. We're glad to have meetings with you if you need along the way. We really want to work with you as a team to get through your project. In terms of a clarification question for you, what is the current use of the facility now? So you might not be doing any construction, but what's the current use now?
At the moment, it's vacant.
It's vacant. Okay. What was it before?
I believe it was some type of retail store. Now we're doing it for a marijuana-infused product license.
Yes. So that change, that is a change of occupancy, a pretty significant one. So that you will have to have a submittal from an architect. They'll have to come in, and there'll be a whole plan review process. You're going to have to start with excise and license, like we talked about, go through each of the components, but you will be required to get an architect on board, because what will happen is there might be, although you might not think there's construction because it's a change in use, egress might have changed, or the number of toilet fixtures, or the alarm system, something from a code, it might trigger because it might have been a less intensive use before, now it's more intensive in terms of code. And that's something that the architect will put a code analysis together and have just a conceptual layout of the plan. You might not need any construction at the end of the day, but we need to see what's there today so that we can evaluate that with the new use. So that's the starting point, is get an architect.
And I guess the second part of my question was the inspections that laid out within the building department inspection process. If there's nothing specifically new being done, who needs to be there, and what inspections will be needed, I suppose.
So through a change in, you're going to get a change in occupancy basically with that, because you're a change of use. And that's going to require, depending on if there's construction, because there might be construction. If there's no construction, you'll still have to get an inspection from each of the trades to just look at what's happening for that. And that'll be, a permit will be submitted for change of occupancy, and then you'll get inspections against that. And you'll still need your license inspection and your zoning inspection with that as well. So you need a zoning permit, a building permit, and all the other processes along the way.
Thanks a lot.
And I should just note on that front, we do actually have a policy on our website, denvergov.org/building code, that outlines the certificate of occupancy process and does have a scenario where there may be no construction needed, but there's still, as Scott said, that code analysis that we need to see, and then a permit that's issued to inspect against and issue that new CO. Do you want to take the second question?
No. I'm actually going to, so Jared Garcia, our Chief Inspector for Licensing, is here, and he is going to answer the second question.
Forgot about my second question. Was it about excise and licensing? Yeah, it was about the process in terms of how would you actually inspect the process of what's going on when you actually doing marijuana.
Okay, so I guess the question is, how would we scrutinize their operation if they're not in operation yet, correct? So we wouldn't really scrutinize you in operation. We would more do that on a follow-up, on a compliance check the following year. Basically, the first inspection on a new facility, we're just checking the floor plan, signage, all that kind of stuff, alarm systems, and pretty much we'll talk about how you're gonna operate and go off of that, because we can't scrutinize you if you're not open yet. So yeah, you don't have product in the building, you're not operating, so it'd be on compliance.
I really appreciate it.
Other questions? Please, don't be shy.
Hi there. I guess I'm just a little confused, and maybe you covered this already, but with for the building department, with the sign and stamp plans, is that sign and stamped by a professional engineer from our side, or would that be sign and stamped by zoning department?
No, by your side. So if whoever architect, engineer, or what have you, if they're a registered design professional submitting plans to us, they have to sign and stamp their work. Essentially, it's them taking ownership and liability for what they're preparing.
Okay. And then my second question is, when we do have a change on layout and we do submit for a zoning review, does that also get forwarded to the building and fire code review as well, or do we need to make a separate submission to that?
A separate submittal, unless you do a request for a simultaneous building and zoning review, as long as you're able to do that. So there are a couple instances where you can't do a simultaneous zoning and building review. If you're in a design review district, for instance, you're downtown and there's design guidelines, you have to do zoning review first. If you're in a landmark district, you've got to do that separate, because there's a whole landmark process involved. There's another one that I'm blanking on. Do you remember the big one? Okay. So yeah, so you would have to make a separate submittal unless you do that simultaneous zoning building request. And then Scott just reminded me that as part of the new electronic plan review, one huge benefit of that is we're gonna submit for your SUDP for you, apparently. That happens, it's part of the process, it happens automatically. So if you don't have the required SUDP documents, you may be asked to resubmit, but that is one benefit of the electronic plan review.
And we do get those SPDUs from 8th and Tejon, right? That office?
So sewer use and drainage permitting is actually here at the Webb Building, second floor. Any other wastewater permits are over at the wastewater management building, and I'm drawing a blank right now on which ones, but I think street occupancy and those other types of permits are over there at wastewater.
At the 8th and Tejon?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Good evening. I'm just curious, and I don't know who to address this to. I do some business brokerage in the cannabis space, and the extraction of hemp has become a very popular item. And my understanding is that the city, county of Denver does not allow any straightforward hemp extraction. And I kind of wanted to understand the logical or practical reason when we have all of this cannabis extraction, why they have decided, what was the reasoning behind not allowing that?
So there's a little bit of a misnomer. It is allowed in a licensed facility. So if you'd like to do it, you are welcome to come in and get a MIP license and do it out of a MIP facility.
So a cannabis MIP license, and then you can extract hemp and CBD.
Yes, however, just keep in mind, your product would have to also come from a licensed facility. So if you'd like to do it, you can do it. You have to do it in the licensed world. You can't be unlicensed and do it. So
Okay.
all marijuana product in the city of Denver has to be handled in a licensed
Okay.
marijuana facility.
I thought they just did some sort of differentiation. I didn't realize it was a licensing question. I don't think most of the world knows it's a licensing question. It's just
Yeah.
like Denver doesn't allow it. So thank you very much for clarifying that for me.
I have two questions. The first one is, the last thing said to send MED approval letters. Is that for everything we do? So like when we do a modification, after you guys have approved it and you send that letter to the med, allowing us to then submit it to the med, we have to then submit the letter from them back to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that moving forward, or like,
That's always
should we
been the case.
backtrack?
Yeah. So, I mean, so after a year, if your application is not complete, which means getting through the whole process, it closes administratively. The number one reason that applications are closing administratively is because we don't have MED approval on file, which means that you might have to start your mod process all over because it timed out. So right now, we're actually sending our inspectors out every time an application expires to say, hey, did you forget this step? But hopefully it just becomes common practice.
okay. So I should just backtrack and send you all of
Yes,
them?
please, send us everything you have.
Okay. The second thing is, if you're changing the use of a room, but it doesn't change the layout, it doesn't add a door, you might have to put in a camera, but just the use of it, does that require a new stamp from zoning
Yes.
for all changes of use, or just if it's changed to a use that involves marijuana?
So if it's a permitted use, that's going to require a mod. So like if your, permitted use is sales, cultivation, testing, I'm missing one, sales, cultivation, extractions, manufacturing, yes, thank you. Yes, we would require you to submit a mod to us, which is going to require, so when zoning comes out, they have a floor plan, and if what they're seeing on that floor plan isn't what's there, that creates a problem for them, because they're signing off that they're seeing something that doesn't exist.
Okay, so, like, say you're changing like a regular storage room that doesn't have marijuana product in it to a storage room with it, then do you need a new stamp from zoning?
No. Storage to storage, no.
But,
But you might have to use their licensed premise if it's not in their license.
no, if it's still within the license premise.
Right, yeah, no, if you're changing the, purpose of that room entirely, then that's a facility layout change. If you're not, I need a step. If you're not changing, something that is like material, then it's not. It's hard to describe. But if you're ever in doubt, that EXL applications inbox, you can email them, and they can walk you through it and look at case-by-case examples.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that if it's a non-conforming use, meaning it's no longer allowed in the district where you're located, then any change whatsoever needs to come back through zoning.
Ernie Martinez, Construction Management. Just had a couple questions. In a greenhouse grow, what dictates whether you have a fire protection system or you don't have a fire protection system? I've seen them both in Denver.
So all greenhouses, all grows are F1 occupancies. F1 occupancies are allowed to go to 12,000 square feet without a sprinkler system. If you put in a 3-hour fire barrier, you're allowed to go up to 24,000 square feet. And if you go beyond 24,000 square feet, then you have to sprinkler.
Okay.
There's also a provision for windowless stories. So if you have a building that's over 1,500 square feet that doesn't have any openings, then that could also drive a sprinkler system. But typically, when they're building greenhouses, it comes down to that 12,000 square foot, and then you could put up a wall and divide it once into 24,000 square feet without a sprinkler system.
Okay.
If you go beyond that, then a sprinkler system's required.
Then the second question, just to make sure we have a little bit of consistency. A lot of times in the building department and zoning department, I'll take 2 copies of staff drawings. I just saw a screen up there that said that you have to have 3 copies. Which of the 2 applies now? Is there a change here?
For building department submittals for paper, you need to give us 3 copies. And the 3 copies are, 1 goes to the assessor's office, because if you're making changes to your space, that impacts potentially what they're taxing you at, so that's how they know what's happening. And then there's 1 set that we keep as our record set, which we keep for 7 years. And then the 3rd set is what we issue out as the contractor set. So when everything's approved, that's what should be on site for our inspectors to see and what should be being built.
So 3 copies is what you want from now on. I just did
Yep, for
3
building,
different
for
projects,
building
so that
permit
I only
submittal,
gave them
yes.
2.
If you're gonna do a simultaneous building and zoning review, then we actually need 4, because you've gotta have a 4 set to give to zoning. And the benefit of electronic is you only need 1.
Hi, my name's Truman, and I just wanted to say thank you guys for doing this. I wish I'd had this a few years ago. I think it would have saved me a lot of time and a few headaches. So thank you. My only question is for cannabis retail fire inspections. There are 2 a year, right?
All marijuana occupancies are inspected twice a year.
Are other retail stores inspected twice a year for fire? And if not, why not?
Commercially, every commercial business occupancy is inspected once annually. When voters approved marijuana, an amendment passed, it was passed under the premise that it was a regulated industry and they were going to operate safely. So that 2 inspection, fire inspection, that's why that's there.
Okay, I mean, I get that. I just heard from folks up here that it was just another store. And it's a small gripe in the grand scheme of things, but if it's just another store, it's just another store.
Well, from a building standpoint, in terms of occupancy, so it's a little different depending on what field you're in.
Okay, thanks.
And I can add to that. So one thing to keep in mind about marijuana that really is different is that a MIP has a much higher likelihood of exploding than a store. And a cultivation has a much higher likelihood of catching fire than a store. So there are some inherent safety risks in this industry that really, like, can you think of another industry other than the oil refinery that could explode like a MIP? No, right. So, I mean, that's always in the back of our head. We don't want things to explode, very much so.
So I'm not asking about MIPS or grows. That makes total sense to me.
Just retail stores.
Yeah, it's just a retail store. It seems a little burdensome.
At the beginning of the presentation, it was mentioned that a change of ownership will require inspections because of a potential threat to public safety. And then the health department or public health, I think it was Shawnette, mentioned that they have the discretion not to do inspections on change of ownership. Is there open discretion for all the agencies, or is that written into the code? And if it's open to interpretation, who interprets that?
Oh, and we do inspections for change of ownership. We do the license inspection to verify that there are no changes. We just don't do a plan review if there's absolutely no construction, no new equipment, nothing that would require a building review.
Fire will inspect, if there's a license inspection due, fire will go out and do an inspection. We won't ignore that request, so.
Piggybacking on the other gentleman's question, do liquor stores get inspected twice a year? Because it's a regulated industry.
Like I said, every commercial business is inspected annually. Marijuana occupancies are inspected twice a year.
But you said because it's a regulated industry.
No, I didn't.
Oh, I thought I heard you say that.
And
That was voted in as far as just the safety. When I said it was regulated, that when the voters passed it, they wanted the industry to be operating safely in confirmation that it was, and that's how we're accomplishing that
Okay,
inspection process.
I misunderstood the regulated part then. Thank you.
Brian, can you do CO2 extraction and post-processing in the same room?
Yes.
Okay. My other question is in regards to security cameras. I had a conversation today with a company who said that there's a minimum of 30 required on site now in order to get a permit.
No.
Okay, cool.
So I think it's Brian, is it M304 and R304 that covers security camera? So so M304 and R304 cover the security camera requirements, and it is basically anything in your limited access area needs to be on camera. There's requirements around being able to recognize facial recognition in point of sale locations, and then in egresses and ingresses around limited access areas. So if you're like, I think the Little Brown House is a 10 by 10 room, they're not just lining up 30 cameras in there. 10, yeah, yeah.
Just to clarify on the CO2 extraction question, the post-oil processing can occur. Normally, if you're using flammable liquids, that has to be done in a hood. So that hood could be located in the CO2 extraction room.
Hi, good evening. Neil Favorite from Decker & Jones. Thanks for hosting this. I just have a quick question. Are there any existing or expected moratoriums on cultivation facilities or retail marijuana stores?
So you cannot apply for medical cultivation ever again, according to the way the ordinance is currently written per city council. And then on the term moratorium, I'm almost wondering, Ashley, do you want to field? Okay, so essentially, there is not a moratorium. There is a cap that city council put into place in May of 2016 that says there shall be no more than this number of locations. And that number of locations has yet to be determined. Essentially, once all the applications that were pending on May 1st of 2016 reached their final resting place, which we're very close to doing, then once we fall below by a certain number, there will be a lottery for new retail stores and new retail cultivation locations. There will not be any new applications accepted for medical centers or medical cultivation. So I would say that is going to occur in 2019, the lottery. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks again. Regarding the use of modular extraction labs like a spray booth and a MIP, do you have any recommendations for showing those on site plans? Or any other recommendations for those?
There are no pre-approved extraction labs, so a spray booth is different than I think what you're referring to as a modular extraction lab. There's companies out there selling a shipping container converted into an extraction lab where it's already wired and everything is there and you can set it down and operate. If that's what you're referring to, all of that needs to be inspected and permitted as though you are building it. So we want to look at the wiring. And the reason for that is because there's no governmental or listing agency listing that whole packaged assembly as an approved unit. So the electrical, you need an electrical permit for the inside wiring of it, the mechanical systems, the ductwork connection to it. If you're talking about a spray booth that's being used as a extraction lab or a ventilated enclosure, the best way to show it, if you're the mechanical engineer of record, is to call it out as a hazardous exhaust system, because we do not call it a spray booth any longer, even though the airflow and everything will accept as an LPG extraction room. It's no longer a spray booth. So the mechanical engineer should specify that as a hazardous exhaust system for LPG extractions. He should show the fan sizing, the velocity of air that's going across it. And if it's a pre-manufactured, not pre-manufactured, but it's sold by a manufacturer, those model numbers should be specified on the mechanical drawings and the supporting documents submitted as far as the approval.
Thank you. Follow-up, can you comment to the air velocity? Do you have a specific?
The fire code requires capture and containment velocity at no less than 75 feet per minute. Typically, laboratory industry standard and the paint booth, automotive paint booth industry standard is 100 feet per minute capture velocity.
Thank you very much.
Hey, I'm John McBroom from Be Good. A couple quick benign questions. One, You mentioned earlier that we can send an electrical contractor in for a quick permit. However, every time I've dealt with the building department, and I believe on the website, it says that all marijuana permitting must be a full login, a commercial login review.
Even if we're just adding a circuit, is that the case?
We've encountered this before, and we had to do a full login. Is commercial, quick permitting allowed now?
Well, so that was specifically, I asked a question about just a security camera. So what permits, because we were debating yesterday if any building permits were needed if someone was adding a security camera. So that's the question I was trying to clarify. So let me go back and ask my staff and double check.
For
And
sure.
we can send out an email to all those that RSVP to clarify.
95% of it's going to require plan review, and
Yeah.
then it can be a quick permit after the plan review's approved.
Right, right.
For sure. Second question. The online zoning inspection scheduling tool thingy through the new system, is the excise and license status synced into that system yet? As I had, for an excise and license request inspection, I did not have the ability to use the online tool.
No.
No worries.
We're working on it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Can you go up to the microphone? Sorry, just because they're recording.
Hi, I have a tight site, and it's a building divided in half, and half of it's going to be a MIP, and the other half is vacant. Do I have to provide parking for the vacant portion and account for, somehow get its previous use, or?
Yeah, we would do that. We would do that calculation based on the previous use. And the thing with parking in the new code is that the new code is so much more permissive than the old one when it comes to parking that I very rarely have an issue with parking. So something that we can definitely have a conversation about. But there is parking credits in the code that are very effective in reducing whatever your new parking requirement is going to be in relation to your old one. And then there's other kinds of reductions and exceptions. But yeah, that we would base that on the previous use, so maybe it was a warehouse, and now your new use is going to be either food prep or it's going to be manufacturing. They both have the same parking requirement. And the warehouse has the same parking requirement. So it's really not a change from the previous use, and there may be no change at all to your requirement.
If
Thank you.
you're going to be doing LPG transfilling, so filling your supply tank in the parking lot, we don't require a dedicated spot. So that can be done operationally in a parking stall and not take away a zoning parking spot.
Yes, that's true, but you guys like to see it on the
We
site
want it,
plan.
we want it shown on the site plan
Yeah.
where you're going to do it, meeting NFPA 58 to separation distances, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a dedicated spot. So if you can operationally stop car traffic, and those cars next to it aren't going to be a fire hazard, then that could be done in a parking lot as long as the separation distances are met.
And you just call it out on your site plan for zoning, and I know that that's something that's not really something that's above the ground that impedes the use of that space. So that's fine.
Corey Cox, Vicente Cedarburg. I wanted to circle back with camera coverage required at the point of sale. And so to kind of confirm the main point you're looking for is that the faces of the consumers and employees would be fully visible from the cameras?
Brian, do you have this memorized? Okay. So essentially, there's a section, I'm pretty sure it's M&R 304,
Right, yeah.
and we word for word are enforcing what's in the MED code book. I don't have it memorized word for word, but I know it says facial recognition everywhere, something along those lines around a point of sale.
Right. So I guess so long as faces are recognized, there's no specific requirements for where the camera needs to be located, so long as faces are.
Anthony is going to answer. Anthony is one of our business license inspectors who has the book.
All right.
306.
I wish you could.
Thanks. It's close. Oh, well, he's just going to give it to me.
And I guess I'm not You know, I'm familiar with the rule. I'm
Right.
not kind of disputing that you need to see faces, but just that the, I guess, emphasis is that you can see the faces and not where the camera that can capture those faces is located.
Anthony?
Yes.
What he says.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? Going once? Going twice? All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming. We really appreciate it. I'll follow up on that security camera question and clarify. We'll send an email out to everybody that RSVP'd. Cards and copies of the presentation are outside. Thanks again.